Welcome to our LB's The Lover of Books author chat. If this is your first time here live or watching a recording, hello and welcome. And thank you for joining. Make sure you click subscribe to my YouTube channel, LB The Lover of Books. Y'all, I'm one away from 800. So somebody click that button for me tonight. Put me to 800. I really appreciate it. And thank you. I do have 45 recorded author chats on that YouTube channel. So I know you're going to find books that you've already read there anyway. So you can go and check those author chats out. And 9,300 hours watched. So people love hearing what authors have to say, me included. That's why I do this. I love it. So go check those out and leave a comment if there's something that you like or that interests you. Now to introduce this amazing book of the month author, Emily Austin. She, her is the author of novels Interesting Facts About Space that we're here to talk about today. Everyone in the room will sometime be dead, and the poetry collection Gay Girl Prayers. Everyone in this room was longlisted for the Stephen Leacock Memorial Medal for Humor, shortlisted for the Amazon First Novel Award, and the finalist for the Ottawa Book Awards. She studied English literature and religious studies at King's University College and library and information science at Western University. She received 2 writing grants from the Canada Council for the Arts and has background in libraries, teaching, and working as an information architect, which I'm not quite sure what that is, but I would love to hear. And she is residing in Ottawa, Canada, just like I said earlier, in the territory, and I'm going to just annihilate this word, Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. How do you say it?
Anishinaabe Algonquin. You're very close. So
very close. I wasn't too bad. Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining, Emily. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
Well, thanks so much for being here. I'm just so excited for, well, just tell me, what is an information architect? Like, I have to know what this is.
Well, so I went to school to be a librarian, and you learn about things like books and reading when you become a librarian, but you also learn about how to organize information.
Okay.
So an information architect is sort of like an architect of information. It's very boring, but yeah, that's what it is. It's about information management.
I think Enid would really like that subject.
That's what it is. Yeah, exactly. I was a little lazy in my giving a job to Enid by giving her a very similar job to mine.
So is that basically what she does for space, like for her department, is that organization?
Pretty much, yeah. I just gave her my job for a space organization. I don't work for a space organization, but
yeah. That would be cool though.
Yeah.
How okay, let's talk about Enid because she is such an interesting character. Would you, how do you describe, is she a reliable narrator? I mean, would you go so far as to say she's an unreliable narrator?
I guess so. I think she's doesn't trust herself very much. So that probably, I'm not sure exactly what qualifies someone as being unreliable, but I think because she doesn't trust herself and she has issues with her own memory and she sort of yeah, so I think it would be fair to say she's not reliable
Well,
completely.
let's back it up even further. Where did Enid come from? Like where did you get this character? How did she come about? Because I love her, first of all. I'm just going to say she really grew on me. So tell us a little bit about that background.
Yeah, so I normally when I start to write a book, I sort of think of the premise before I think of the character. And the premise for this that I had originally thought of was that it was going to be a character who had a phobia of bald men. And what I normally do is after I think of the premise, I write the first chapter or so, like the first 30 pages, and try to see what character would sort of fit that. I wanted her to be someone who is, fearful. Obviously, she's got this fear of bald men, but she also has this fear of intimacy, and that sort of came out of what my first novel. Everyone in this room will someday be dead. I got a lot of feedback in the editing process about editors wanting to see more of the relationship that character has with her girlfriend. And I realized as part of that editing process that it was hard for me to write that relationship for some reason. And so with this book, I thought I'm going to write about someone in a relationship. I'm going to write about someone who's fearful of being in a relationship, who, has like a fear of intimacy, and veil it with her having a fear of bald men and being, being a fearful person in general. So anyways, that's a long way of saying that's where she came from.
I understand that leap from the fear of intimacy. I think that that's a common, not real common, but it's a well-known, but fear of bald men, that's so specific. So how did that, I mean, like, oh, I'm going to write a novel about the fear of bald men. Like, what? Like, how did that, I love it, first of all. And I love how, and oh, let me just say, we will probably start off a little bit non-spoiler here at the beginning, but we do talk spoilers. This group has read the book. So we will get there, people. Don't worry. Go ahead.
Where does the bald man? Yeah, you know what? I don't know. I remember I thought about like I like to write about anxiety, and I had already written my previous novel about a deeply anxious person with sort of existential dread. And I still wanted to write more about a character who was struggling with that, but I wanted them to have a different experience. And I think a phobia is just an intense sort of form of anxiety. So I thought, okay, she'll have a phobia. And then I started looking through lists of phobias, like real phobias that people have. And I was intentionally trying to look for one that I thought sounded funny. And then I saw bald men and I thought, that sounds funny, I'll do that. And since that, I've been in rooms with bald men where I have to say, I've written this book about someone who has an irrational fear of bald men, and they're like, sorry. Yeah.
Well, I think this book definitely needs the humor side to for a nice balance, right? Because so much of it is so serious. But when I introduced you, your studies were in English and religious studies. There was nothing in regards to as a clinician, mental health. Where did this passion to write about mental illness or phobias or disorders, where did that come from?
Yeah, I think well, I have some experience with having anxiety and mental illness, and I'm in therapy, and I've had, I've been able to explore topics like psychology a little bit in university, but also just like in my own personal mental health journey. And I think I like to write about, I mean, obviously, people like to write about what they know about to a certain extent. Obviously, some people like to write about like dragons and things like that they don't know about. So that's one thing. But at the core of it, I think we're trying to communicate an experience we've had or some insight we have or something, right? And that's an area I have some experience with. So I feel like I can write about it.
Well, I'm going to give you slow clap here because we need more conversations about this stuff, right? I mean, so many people have something that they're dealing with. And heck, Enid didn't even get therapy for how long in her life, right? Like, she
Yeah.
never even really discussed it. She helped deal with her mom's mental illness, but never really her own. So, one, thank you very much for talking about this and especially bringing your own into it. I just I think Enid is such an interesting character. Um, let's talk about her mother though, because her mom is very interesting as well. What is her diagnosis? What do you think?
I don't know if I could. I was trying to write her as having depression. Like I wanted to, and that was also part of my initial thought for this story was that my first novel was about someone who themselves had depression. And again, I like to write about mental illness, and I thought another sort of way to write about that is to write about the impact it has on the people around you. And what does it feel like, for example, to be the child of someone who is mentally ill or who suffers with depression. So and also part of the story is about Enid having this fear of intimacy, both in terms of having a relationship with someone, but also um like her mom never says that she's depressed. And her mom doesn't, she, like, Enid notices that she's not wearing lipstick and that her house is a mess and things like that. But her mom also has a fear or some sort of barrier that's affecting her ability to be honest about how she's feeling, right? And that's sort of it is sort of like it's intimate to admit that you are depressed and to be honest about feeling the way that you do. And so I was also trying to show the impact of that, and to write a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, this translates directly into Enid's own self because that's the only role model she's had pretty much growing up. And so, at least Enid has her mom's lipstick. Enid doesn't even have that marker for her friend, right? Like he said, why don't you wear lipstick? I don't even know. And
Yeah.
so for her, it's the next step, but she doesn't really admit that she has a problem either. I think she just believes that she's a bad person in a lot of ways. Like it's just so negative towards herself. I don't know that. Do you think she actually realizes that she has depression,
Yeah,
anxiety? Like,
anxiety. I think hopefully that'll come through a bit in the therapy that she's having. I think she starts to recognize, especially through the phobia, that there's something amiss, like I think um obviously she's able to recognize this isn't mentally well to have this phobia. And she's like, but I'm dealing with the feeling that I really do think someone's breaking into my house. And despite the fact that I recognize it's absurd for me to be afraid of a bald man, I realize something is amiss here. Like I also have this irrational fear. That's not mentally, normal. So I think she does see it a little bit more. And I think she sees it in her mom a little bit more too. Like, I don't think she's, completely ignorant about the reality of people having mental illness, but at the same time, she's, our culture does there is a lot of improvement, especially in younger people, I think, in terms of being open about mental illness, but it's still kind of on the surface level. And while we do things like talk about, like we have days where we talk about mental illness and we say, it's important to talk about mental illness, and you hear that a lot. But the reality of it is that, if you're, for example, at a workplace and someone calls in sick, and if they were to say, I called in sick because I'm depressed, they probably would get some judgment, right? And it wouldn't be received the way that we sort of preach that it should be. So yeah, I think there's still, a lot to do there. But
oh yeah, a headache versus depressed is totally not handled the
yeah,
same way.
yeah.
Paige says she loves the connection to her own lack of intimacy in relationships as an adult. She's referring back to Enid. And I agree. She knows that she has a lack of intimacy. She knows one date and she loves, I don't know what loves, but she has a copy and paste breakup message. I mean, come on. Like she knows that that's going to end soon because she's ready at any moment, you know? So I just, yeah, I think she is more self-aware. I agree to that. Why does she have such I mentioned this earlier, she has such a negative sense of self. She describes herself as a shell, as rotten, as bad, as having a parasite. Like it's constant. Where did all of that root from, and why did it go the pendulum swings so far with her?
Yeah, I think it's a few things. One is that I was trying to write her as being like a neurodivergent character, and also someone who has invisible disabilities. Like she's deaf in one ear, and she's potentially autistic, and has social challenges, and she deals with her mental health. So she has these sort of secret challenges. And often people who are autistic, especially people who are women who are autistic, because it manifests differently, and especially people who are not necessarily aware that they are, or that they're neurodivergent in some way, often have this feeling that something's wrong with them. And they often feel like, oh, something's off. Like I can tell, I'm not exactly like other people. I have to mask. There's this like symptom of feeling like you have to put on this face is it to operate in the world. And that's especially true of women who are neurodivergent. You pretend like you're a particular person at work, like you're a put together professional young woman. To your parents you're someone, to your friends you're someone. You're like playing a role instead of being your actual self. Anyway, so and then also, so she has that, and that was supposed to be part of that. It was supposed to demonstrate that experience, but also she was abandoned by her dad when she was really little, and feels rejected, and sort of has a childhood wound around that. And I don't know that she's necessarily self-aware of that, but I think often, if you're a kid who was rejected by someone who's supposed to love you, it does make you feel like, oh, what's wrong with me? And especially in her case, where he went on to have two other kids who were similar in age, and who he was present for it, especially to a child. And we're all built on the children that we were, and the way that we think about things is influenced by thoughts we had when we were kids. And we're not always able to think about things like this fully as kids. So you don't always critically assess some of your, preconceived thoughts. So I see her also as someone who was a kid who thought my dad didn't love me and I wasn't good enough. And me and my mom are like not lovable people. And there's something wrong with me. So I think it's both of those things that make her feel like that.
This concept, I've never known much about it or if at all, but this combination of women and neurodivergent having this way of thinking, is that helped with therapy, or is that something that she has because she hasn't had the therapy, or is it something that's continuous because of the condition?
I think being aware of that is something that can help. I mean, just to say, I'm not an expert
Right,
in.
right, right. You were
So
novelist. I'm
caveat
just,
with that, yeah. But
yeah,
I do think
research.
I think women are conditioned socially, and anyone who's raised as a girl is conditioned socially to behave certain ways that men and boys are not as much. There is a certain performative aspect to being a woman. Like we are taught even in ways that we don't even necessarily recognize, but we're taught to behave a certain way. We're taught to present a certain way, and you kind of learn social scripts when you're a girl, even if you're not neurodivergent. You learn certain social scripts. You understand how to interact with, like an old man who's being nice to you, but you can kind of sense it's kind of weird. You know how you're supposed to interact in that situation. You know how you're supposed to interact with, teachers. There's a different social script that girls are given. And when you're neurodivergent and autistic, my understanding is that um, girls, because we are given that social script, we have a higher capacity to mask and to put on a performance and to hide, because all women have to do that to a certain extent anyway. So even women who aren't neurodivergent have to kind of mask a little bit throughout their lives, because we were put together proper young ladies. We're whatever we are, right? We're whatever we're taught to be. And that's a little bit more extreme for women than it is for men. And so we all are taught to mask. And so people who are autistic, especially, can sometimes, like a lot of women who are autistic don't find out that they're autistic. And a lot of, research about what it means to be autistic is based on men, because it was only ever, uh, seen in men and assessed in men. And the way that it manifests in women is very different because of social conditioning and how we're taught to behave as children.
It's fascinating. I will just say absolutely fascinating. I loved the scene, and I cannot remember her name, but when Enid comes out of the bar and the girl can't pay for her sandwich, and they have this one moment together, and they
Yeah.
were talking so deep. Like, and that's what's so interesting about Enid. Like, they're sitting on this bench, right? And the girl comes out and says exactly that. Like, my face is different for my roommate, for my parents,
Yeah.
when I'm at work, when I'm at school. And that applies to all women and probably men as well. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
but so much so for women. And I really identified with that, because who my mother sees is not necessarily who my brother or my husband or my children see, or, best friends or whoever. I love that concept. And it made me really ponder so deeply how far that goes, right? Like, how different am I to all these people,
Yeah. Yeah. I think about that too, obviously, but yeah, I think especially the idea that to some people you could be so radically different. Like, I would hate to think it, but I imagine that throughout my life there's probably someone who, really dislikes me, and maybe I deserve that for some reason, but they've seen this, snippet of me that is maybe a bad person or is whatever, right? And it's interesting and sort of upsetting to think like, oh, I could be so radically different to so many different people. But yeah.
I think that really applies to Enid, because her behavior can be very radical. I mean, let's be honest, like, she can be one way or hot and cold in a lot of ways. And how she presents herself to one person, you're not really seeing who her core is, right? Is it Ben? Is that her, the best friend?
Yes. Yeah.
Who he sees is not, who obviously the other workers see, because she's so short with them. I find it so fascinating, that whole concept. I feel like there could be, I don't know. I'm like, oh, like, this would be such a great topic.
Oh,
Um, all right. So let's get back to Enid. Why do you think Enid does want to date so much? Like, she puts herself out there. She goes on the dating profiles. What is it about it? Because she also doesn't really like social situations.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
I
that's
think,
like throwing yourself in the fire in a lot of
yeah,
ways.
that's true. I think in that case, I think she has memorized the script sort of how to have a short-term romantic interaction with someone. Like, she knows how to go through a first date, because this is something that you learn as you get older, and she's learned that. She's memorized that script, but she hasn't gone beyond it. And I think we all, even people who, like, I'm deeply introverted personally, and I don't love, like, I could go a very long time without any social interaction, but I still think I think everyone has like a desire to have human connection. And having some sort of, we have this, we want to connect with people. I think she does. I think she um is afraid of love or intimacy or being close with people, but also really, like, everybody kind of needs that. And that's what's driving her in that case, is connection to other people.
When you said that, it made me think of Enid's life as a reel, like the movie's going, and that first date happens and she knows what to do, second date, third date, and then all she knows for the next step is the copy and paste, right? Like after that, emotionally, or like, what do I do? It's
Yeah.
not until this cheating aspect comes that blows all of that up,
Yeah.
because that's one never happened. And now she has a drunk person in her house
Yeah.
in her shower, right? Like there's no script for that. And so we
Exactly.
get such a raw Enid, which I loved. And I think, like, I don't know how much I loved Enid before until she has these raw moments, not the script,
Yeah.
actual Enid. Like, and so tell me a little bit about that. Like, what did you need to do to disrupt her script and
Yeah.
these these moments of spark happen?
Yeah, I think with Polly, that was part of what made, that was how the universe was sort of allowing, and the universe is me because I'm writing the story, but it's how the world made it possible for them to have a connection, is because, like you said, yeah, the interaction wasn't one that she had memorized. It wasn't like she was saying the same things that she says to other people. It wasn't like she was wearing the same costume, playing the same role. She had to um work off the cuff. She had to interact, and it made her be more authentic. And especially because Polly was so vulnerable in that situation. And partly because, Enid has a lot of empathy and compassion for her mom, who was rejected by her dad. And part of what her fear of getting close to people is she worries she's a bad person. And she doesn't want to be her dad in anyone else's story. She doesn't want to be this person who has devastated someone. So because she sees Polly dealing with that, she is more authentic and honest, and sort of drops the mask, and tells her things like, I've never been in a long-term relationship with someone. And I think even mentions that her dad had kids. Like, she tells her little secrets that she kind of is, that are sensitive to her. And that, you have to be vulnerable with people to connect with people. And if you actually want to form like an authentic relationship with someone, or know someone, you can't be pretending. You can't put on a face. You have to be yourself. And that's why that was their first interaction. Yeah.
And I think it's just so interesting, like, because I thought, am I going to like Enid when I'm reading this? Like, because it's not that I have to love a character to love a book,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
I did not anticipate really liking Enid until that mask, like you said, dropped.
No.
And those are those moments. It's like, oh,
No.
like, come on. We're rooting for her to have these breakthroughs. And, I'm thinking, and why aren't you in therapy? Like, come on. But Gianna did say, and I'm going to get back to some of these in the chat box. As a neurodivergent female, ADHD therapy has helped me a lot. But the point of it in my case is not to cure me of my neurodivergence. It's to understand how I fit in this world and how to nurture my body, mind, even if it doesn't look or function like the typical female mold. And I totally agree. Like, I love that about Enid. Like, she's not trying to change for anybody. She's just trying to find her place. Like, how can she be her authentic self and find the people around her that accept her for her?
Yeah, I think, and part of what I was trying to do in this story is Enid is also surrounded by so many people who do want to love her. Like, her sisters do care about her, and her mom does, and Vin does. and she has this fear that something's terribly wrong with her and that she has this parasite. But you know, the truth is a lot of people, like her sister mentions that she feels like that too. Like a lot of people have this fear. Most people have this fear that something's wrong with us or that we're bad in some way. And she doesn't realize that she's not unique in that, and that you know, her actual self is, you know, worthy of relationships and love and people caring about her.
Now, I know she's pretty protective about who she interacts with, right? I mean, but she seems to be a pretty good judge of character because the people that she does surround herself with are, like you said, people that want to give her love. For instance, I didn't know if how that sister relationship was going to work. Hannah even says, I absolutely love how you navigated the relationship with her sisters and their mom. Not what I was expecting when the book started, and it was just so heartwarming. I mean, like it could have gone a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
But there was that connection there, and it was a vulnerable moment with the pregnancy about to happen. Why did you decide to bring that portion in? Just tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, well, I wanted it to be a story about Enid realizing that that she can connect with other people and can love other people and that she can be loved too. I didn't want her to be, and I mean there is a bit of like the her stepmom is a little antagonistic and she doesn't have the same connection with her, and there's a bit of that, but yeah, my intention with the story was to show that people aren't all, you know, villains, and that people aren't out to get her, and that people don't see her badly, and that especially in this case where she has, you know, these are her sisters, and she thinks, you know, maybe they have some ulterior motive to get close to her, but why would they? You know, there's no reason why they wouldn't like her. Um and there's no reason why she can't, you know, have a friendship with Vin, for example. She there's no reason why she shouldn't be you know, connected with other people and they shouldn't be kind to her too. Obviously there are people who won't be kind to us in the world, but
Oh
I
yeah.
wanted to
Well,
show her with some people that were.
she also definitely compartmentalizes her relationships, right? Like she kind of keeps her mom
Yeah.
the house. She keeps Vin in a bubble for the
Yeah.
most part. She keeps Polly, and then she keeps her sisters. Like she doesn't even want her mom and the sister. Like it's very much.
Yeah.
My guess is to have a little bit more control in it,
Yeah.
but when it all starts to bleed a little bit together, things get a little bit more out of whack. So, how did you know it was time to start to bring mixing some of these in?
Yeah, yeah, that is part of it, is like, you know, especially in with that what you just mentioned about you know, how we're different people to the different people in our lives. Um and you know, to your coworker, you might be perceived one way, to your, you know, estranged half sisters, you might be one person, to your mom, you might be another person. And what Enid is trying to do is like, you know, what I'm trying to do with her story is make her be herself and not be this inauthentic version of herself with all these people. And when you're forced to be uh you know, around all the people who see you differently, you're kind of left with having to be who you are, right? You can't really, you can't cater to their perception of you if it's all different. You have to just be yourself and accept, you know, with her, she has this horrible fear that she's this bad person and that she needs to behave a certain way. She has to be very controlled about how she interacts with people. And when the worlds sort of mesh, she's sort of left with having to be herself, and to face that maybe she's not this horrible person.
Well, I think this touched, a lot of people, like, Tracy's agreeing with Ginger, and they're saying, I mean, when someone does leave you, like the dad, to this day, you feel like an outsider. And so there's that feeling as well. But Ginger brings up a great point that we haven't even talked about was, and you mentioned you chose to have her deaf in one ear. Did you know that from the beginning? Like, oh, bald men fear, I bet he's going to be, deaf, to add on to that. Or did that come later? How did that flow into your thought process?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely bald men first. It was bald men forward and then thought of other things. But I wanted, when I thought of her character, part of what I try to do no matter what I'm writing though is to sort of show what a person is thinking that could be misperceived by others. So for example, the people that Enid goes on these short dates with, they might think of her as like a cold, self-serving person. And maybe she is a little bit, especially in those interactions, but that's not really what's motivating her, right? Like if I went on a short date with Enid and she sent me that text, my perception would be like, she's not nice, right? Like I wouldn't think, oh, she's like deeply afraid of intimacy and does this with everyone. This has nothing to do with me. She's got this, I wouldn't know what's motivating that. And with the deaf ear thing, similarly, when she's in grocery stores, for example, and accidentally bumps into someone or doesn't say, doesn't move when someone says, excuse me, their perception of why she's behaving that way is that she's rude, right? They can't tell that there's actually a reason that they don't realize. And that was part of what I was trying to show with her. I was trying to use that as a way of showing that we all have our own secret, that saying that like, we're all fighting our secret battles. You don't know what other people are dealing with. I was trying to show that. Also, I'm blind in one eye, and I've had some experiences where in like grocery stores or like I'm walking, it happens in grocery stores because the aisles are are such an obstruction that you turn and you don't realize that there's a cart there and people will
There's a
get,
blind spot. Yeah, there's a
yeah,
blind
it's a
spot.
blind
Yeah.
spot. Yeah. And people will get mad at you. And so I like to write a little bit about my own experiences. I had this experience with my first book where I found a lot of people talk to you like you're the character in the book when you write a book. So I didn't want to blur the lines too much by making her blind in one eye. So I thought I'll make her deaf in one ear. And then we got a sensitivity reader who had experience with hearing loss, who read it over and made sure it was accurate. So it was a cool experience. But yeah.
Well, and Ginger loved that you brought in about the Facebook group that you can go to in your hard of hearing,
Yeah.
and just having that, because that man was just so rude to her at the grocery store. And it's almost like I learned in like a DEI class where, when a microaggression happens, have a buddy like, did this really happen? Is this real? Like, having that backup is
Yeah.
crucial, and having that connection.
Yeah, I think that's true of all, like having a community. It transcends. It goes for like being deaf in one ear. It goes for being like a queer person or being a woman or being whatever, like having a marginalized identity or anything. There's certain experiences like that, for example, where you're like, am I overreacting, or is this true? But also just having community with other people who see the world and experience the world similarly to you is validating and helps you operate in the world.
Well, it's just, if you deal with it right then it's so much healthier than like what Enid does, is hangs on to things for so long and it
Yeah.
just festers, right? Like a parasite, which Lisa says that's such a strong word, but that's what she uses. It's a parasite. But you do use the term gratuitous antagonism when you're talking about this. Explain that a little bit. And I'm assuming this has happened to you as well, or maybe not, but I don't want to talk to you like you're Enid, because I don't think
No,
that.
it's okay.
I would love for that to explain that, because I think that's an important thing for everyone to know about.
Yeah, I think sometimes people are oddly quick to react to you out of like a misunderstanding. And I think they're probably all fighting their own battles too, and who knows what's gone on with them. But there is this animosity that sometimes you get when your motivations aren't understood. And I think that often happens, especially to people who, like it could be that you're deaf in one ear, or you're blind in one eye, or it could be that you're neurodivergent, or that you're social, you have some social challenges that other people don't, and you might be perceived as rude or, mean or direct or blunt or whatever, when really, what's motivating you you're not trying to make other people's existence negative. You're just trying to operate in the world. You're just trying to exist, right?
Yeah. I love, my husband actually told me like your first original rash thought is probably never your best one. Like,
Yeah, that's a
take a
good.
breath, see, like, see, is this really how I want to react? And is this really me? And is this big enough to, so
Yeah.
I love that concept, because Enid gives me so much perspective in life, not just for a deaf person, but like you said, any of those invisible scars, battles, whatever. Like Enid can represent so many things in society. Like I love her, and I think that's why I love her so much, because she could be so much in so many people that I know, and I loved it.
Aw.
Now, I am going to say that you talk about dark matter. And to me, that seems so much like you were describing her mental illness. And I'm going to give the quote: it's made of particles that don't emit, absorb, or reflect light. So it's a material that can't be seen. When you can't see something, one way to understand what it is by assessing what affects the things that you can see. For example, places of high concentration of dark matter bend light. So to me, it's almost like that's a metaphor. Like that dark matter was her. She had no, we're trying to see her through other people almost. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's the fun thing with space is that I was able to use that in in veiled ways to communicate certain things like Enid struggles with that case. There were certain things about her mom's mental illness that I was trying to do with space there too. Space is just a fun vehicle for communicating things
All
like
right,
that.
give us those tidbits on the mom. Like in case we didn't get those Easter eggs, what were you dropping?
Oh, I wish I could. I have such a bad memory. I would need to.
I'm putting you on the spot. I will say one that I did get, or my interpretation, of course, is gravity. So much, you're talking about gravity, and that's what holds us down. But what is her gravity? And I know Lisa and Tracy in here are going to love that I'm bringing it to this. It's her space facts for one, but it's also those true crime podcasts. Like to me, that's her safety blanket. That's what keeps her okay in the moment, it seems like. So let's get to that. Let's get to that podcast, true crime. Where did that come from? Is that something you love, or is that just something you're bringing in for Enid?
I went through a stage when I was younger where I definitely consumed a lot of true crime. I sort of maxed out on it, but I was thinking, okay, I do have I listen to and watch documentaries and podcasts and things to a point where I'm like, well, I have that knowledge in my head. I should probably use that in a book. But it felt like appropriate for this book because this book is so much about fear and and so Enid, and Enid is also neurodivergent and she has a bit of a hyperfixation on those topics like true crime. That's part of it is like getting really invested in a topic. And with true crime, it was a good vehicle to explore her idea that she's a bad person and to play with the idea that um she experiences fear differently. Like she's got this irrational fear of bald men. She's afraid of getting close to people, but she's able to listen to like stories about horrific axe murderers or whatever she's listening to. um I was sort of trying to explore how we experience fear and how we cope with fear. And true crime is a good example of how a lot of people listen to that in a way that they become desensitized to it. There are different motivations why we listen to it. Sometimes we listen to it because we think it will help prepare us if we're ever in a bad situation. There's apparently, I was reading a lot about why we read and consume true crime, and there's also there's something cathartic about reading about something terrible and it not happening to you. There's like a positive chemical feeling associated with that apparently, that can be calming, weirdly. So those were all sort of reasons why Enid
The
had.
not me moment type thing. And she also mentions, Enid does, like how the intonation, how they can speak so calmly about these things, because I think Enid loves taking fears such as space, because she was really terrified of space at certain point in her life, and true crime, and taking ownership of those and now using them both as her comfort blanket. But those were both irrational fears, or those were both fears that she couldn't really do anything about because it's space and it's crime.
Right.
But she can't see how bald men, looking at pictures of bald men, how she could do the same thing. In her head, they're completely different types
Yeah,
of fears.
yeah,
And
that's
the bald men pictures were way worse than serial killers. Like, somebody says like they had to stop researching about these serial killers because we all went on a deep dive on all this. That was fascinating,
yeah.
like, and hilarious at the same time. Like you said, like it's bald men.
Yeah, I think fear is such a funny, it's a strange emotion. I think that's what it is. it's odd that we can be, especially when you think about phobias and having irrational fears of things. Um, and you think about things that are truly terrifying that we don't think about all the time, like death and the fact that we're in space. And, you know, there are these horrible, terrifying aspects to being alive that we all kind of,
Yeah.
you know, get through without fixating on. But yeah, I was trying to, I wanted to explore her. I was mostly thinking about her fear of love, and I was trying to use of intimacy, right? And I was trying to use topics like true crime and space and all that to show how she's coped with this in the past in a way that wasn't necessarily productive or resulted in her actually overcoming it. It just made her like numb to it, for example. And obviously, if you, that wouldn't be the best outcome for her in terms of love, right? Just being numb to it wouldn't be the ideal end state.
I think so many of us, and we don't talk about it so much, but we all at some point picture the worst case scenario, right? Like in your, like you have to be able to stop it, but you do go down that and you have to be like, okay, no. Um, for well, let's get back to some comments here because Shanna says she loves that she was a computer science person and the information science and all the facts. So there are things that we can identify with. The space, was that something that you just thought because it was that big unknown, or do you also have a connection with space?
I don't really have a connection with space. I mean, I find it really interesting. So I thought it was a good topic. I think that's a little bit of a writing tip, is to pick a subject that you would be interested in sort of spending time with, especially when you have writer's block or you're finding it hard to write. I was able to like, oh, I'll just go, you know, read about space, and this will be a way of this is sort of like writing. So that's why I picked that. I was interested enough, but I know I certainly didn't have like a deep knowledge of space.
Well, I loved that when this book was coming out, I think there was some football player that denied space, and I was almost like, read this book. Now, you know, like, come
Space.
on. I do have some rapid fire questions for you. People, if y'all have questions for her, be thinking of them, know how to raise your hand. But this is not as scary as space or Ted Bundy. So just first thing that pops out of your head. All right. YouTube or TikTok?
TikTok.
Early bird or night owl?
Early bird, I guess.
Plotter or pantser?
Answer.
True crime shows or podcasts?
True crime shows.
Are ghosts real?
Say that again.
Are ghosts real?
Are goats real?
Ghosts, like
Oh, I
Casper.
thought you said ghosts. I was like,
That's my southern accent. Like that's me trying to get the long syllable.
are ghosts real? Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned a negatory word with bath in your book. So I'm gonna ask you, shower or bath?
Bath.
Short or long-term relationships?
Long term.
Wine or beer?
Beer.
Mexican pho. Is it pho or pho? Pho?
I
How
think
do you
it's
say it? Pho? Pho? Or German donor? Donor. I think it's a donor, isn't it? Donor.
you know, I like the German Donner. Yeah, that we've got a good place around here where I get that, so I'll say that.
So good. Dateline or SpongeBob?
uh Dateline, I guess, but
And then give us your favorite space fact.
oh man, so I it's hard to pick a quick one, but I'm especially interested in black holes and the idea of time being relative. That I find is the most interesting area of space.
That's fascinating. Could you ever, because you kind of mentioned you like talking about what you know, but then you also mentioned dragons. Could you go into the science fiction realm with that theory or no?
Could I write science fiction? Is
Yeah,
that
like just curious with, I mean, time, relevance, dark holes. I'm just wondering, like,
I find that really interesting. I don't know if I'm best equipped to write that. I mean, who knows, but I probably maybe. I mean, not imminently, but maybe someday.
yeah. All right, people, if y'all want to ask a question, please raise your hand. You can ask Emily a question. You can also type it in the chat box and I can ask it on your behalf. I will go through and make sure. Wow, Tracy just said my husband actually worked on the first Mars rover.
Oh, that's so cool.
really cool, interesting space back there. So thank you for that. Um, and then Ginger said, I thought the way her mom responded to all the space facts was so interesting. It was almost comforting for both the mom and the daughter. Explain that one to us.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to show, part of what I was trying to show with their relationship is that they do sort of meet each other where they are, right? Like they are, her mom happily listens to Enid tell her lots of facts about space, despite the fact that she hasn't necessarily, that might not be her special interest. She's obviously engaged enough, and with Enid, I wanted to show, her relationship with her mom is partly meant to show she cares about her mom and she does things like check on her and cleans the house. And, I wanted that to be sort of evidence to show that she isn't actually a terrible person and that she is capable of having a relationship with someone that is where they kind of meet each other where they are and it's authentic. And, so that's what I was trying to do with the mom.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a little bit with Enid. She feels guilt. Anytime she feels guilt about seeing the sisters, she immediately reacts with the fact. But I do feel like when her mom will ask for them, right? Like it is a comfort.
Yeah.
And I think that's also um because her mom was she cared for small children. Like that's very, I don't know, I just felt like that was very much in character. Oh, someone wants to know, they're adding their own. We have a crowd adding their own rapid fire questions. So I'm going to prolong this a little bit more and ask you, what are you more scared of, space or ocean?
um that's really, I guess, space, but oceans are scary, especially when you get right down there. There's some really, I mean, they're both horrifying, but space, I guess.
All right, Hannah says, I know books come out quite a bit after you actually write them. So can you tell us something about what you're working on now? Like book five, I'm including GGP as 3 and 4, which you just mentioned on TikTok. Wait, tell us. I'm not okay. You got it. Fill us in here. What's the TikTok news?
I missed what I have a new book coming out. That might be what it is. I have another book that I just got to announce recently. It's called,
Okay, tell.
yeah, it's titled We Could Be Rats. It's a story about sisters. It's about growing up in a small conservative community, and it's about like childhood imagination. That's what it's called. We Could Be Rats. And what I'm currently, but you're right that you write things quite a while ago. Like I wrote interesting facts about space before, like I was starting to write it before my first book ever came out. So it's been a while, and it's funny to talk about things that because you're like, man, I should read it again for myself, especially because, you've written, like at this point, I've written like, I've written We Could Be Rats, and I'm writing, obviously I like to write, so I'm writing something else right now. And so it's hard in your mind to be like, what was my intention back when I wrote that?
Okay, so Ginger follows up. Do you have sisters? Because she loves the sister themes. You've had a sister like Enid. Now you're talking about another sister theme.
Yeah, I have a little brother too. I have 2 older sisters also. Yeah.
And I'm going to follow up because you said rats. That was what was on Enid's arms, her tattoo. So what's
Yeah.
the connection? Like that's not random.
It kind of is. There's not really a major connection there beyond the fact that I like rats, I guess. That's what it is.
I'm like, because that was a bit, Polly's like, why do you have rats? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And now you have a title. I'm thinking there's something subconsciously
Yeah, maybe.
gonna
Yeah.
pull out of you. Yeah, exactly. Um, this novel was absolutely fantastic. I did not know going in how much I would love it. I did hear about it because of Book of the Month. What was that like? Because you now have a new readership, like adding to, which is obviously what you want. You're building characters layer by layer, but you're also building readers layer by layer. So tell us a little bit about that Book of the Month experience.
Yeah, well, it's so cool. It's so cool for a book to be included in that. And you're right. I think what it does, I think a great thing about Book of the Month is that it does connect you with readers who maybe wouldn't have found the book otherwise. And so it opens it opens you up to this connection with other people who maybe wouldn't have found it. So it was so cool. It was a really cool experience.
Well, do you have a working title for your other book, or is that kind of not yet?
I'm working on, I don't really, yeah. I'm writing one right now that's about, I went to school to be a librarian. So the one that, and who knows, when you start writing something, like I often feel like I'm abandoning this.
Take
So
a
who
chance.
knows what,
Yeah,
yeah,
we're not holding you to it.
yeah. But the thing I'm writing right now is about a librarian. So maybe something librarian-esque in the title. I don't know.
I know Shanna's librarian. We have some other librarians probably on
Uh,
the call, so they'll be definitely fascinated. And I do love how I almost see it like you're building those characters. Like I know it's a female. I know it's gonna have this fear of bald heads. I know it's like this growth that I think is just so fascinating. So I can't wait to see what you're, doing. Oh, Natalie's in library school right now. So here we
cool.
are.
Aw,
Um,
cool.
yeah,
Welcome to librarianship.
exactly. Well, I mean, you're in a room of book lovers, so the chances are there. Um, so Mindy says, I have so many book characters I love, but I don't often get to identify with characters. I identified with Enid so hard and wanted to say thank you.
Oh, that's so sweet of you. Thanks for saying that. That means a lot to me.
And I think just keep giving it to us because it's just I feel like this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just the
That's
first nibble of cheese for the rat. Like we're gonna see a whole lot more from you. Oh, Hannah does all these questions are coming in. Hannah says, have you had full control over the titles of your book? I met another author recently who said her books were renamed by the pub team.
You know what? What I'm not a very particular person. And so what I actually do when I write a book is I generally put in the on the header page, I put a title and then I put like a list of possible other titles. And I ask them which one they like the best. Because when I'm writing a book, the title changes all the time for me, right? Like there's probably some exceptions, but for the most part, I'm never like, this is fully the title. So I don't have like a huge emotional attachment to titles. So I have had the experience where like a working title was like, oh, let's think of another one. But I've always been involved in what the title would be. And I get the impression that if I felt strongly, that I think if you feel strongly, they're not going to force you to have a title. They want you to like the title of your book, right? It would be awful to have to talk about something if you really hated the title.
Well, Lisa, I think she wants a novella, interesting facts about serial killers. Is the title that she was going for. And Natalie, our resident librarian, like in school, says, and I think this is a fantastic reference, Enid seeing faces in the patterned yellow wallpaper. Is that a reference to the yellow wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman?
Yeah.
An interesting reference for Enid. If you know, you know.
It was. Yeah. Thanks for noticing those little things. That's fun. I like to do, I went to school for English lit and I remember the teachers telling us things and I remember thinking, did the author even think of that? Like you're just making things up. And so now I'm like, no, I'm going to do those things. I'm going to do those little things that the English teachers made me think were made up.
Keep doing them. Like that's my favorite part. Like let's find those jewels. All right, I have another question for you. Because you are an English major, you've probably read so many books for school, for pleasure, for research. Give us some recommendations that you think that we should be reading.
Yeah, so there's one called a newish book called Greta and Walden by Rebecca K. Riley. It's a story, I think it's pitched as being like, it's very funny. So it's pitched as being sort of like the show Schitt's Creek, if you've seen that. It's like Schitt's Creek meets Normal People by Sally Rooney, that book. It's a story about siblings and it's about the siblings are queer and they have multiracial identities. It's set in New Zealand. It's a really interesting, funny book. So that's called Greta and Walden. Never Been Better by Leanne Toshiko Simpson it deals with mental illness. So it's a story about these three friends who met in like a psychiatric ward. And the author's open about this, or she's had experience being in a psychiatric ward. So it's very like realistic in terms of that. And she's writing from her own experience. And it's a story about these three friends, and two of them are getting married. And the story is told from the perspective of the woman who's not getting married. And she thinks she's in love with the man who's marrying the other one. So it's a bit of a it's a bit of a web there, but it deals with mental illness. It's also like, it's definitely serious in some ways, but it's also light in other ways and funny. So yeah, those are two. Greta and Valden and Never Been Better are two great reads.
I'm thinking I should have asked another rapid fire question because I loved your humor in this book, and I seriously laughed out loud when she was like, when the therapist asked her, "Would you rather watch YouTube videos or talk about like the Baldwin?" She was like, "Do you want to get punched in the face or waterboarded?" Whatever it was. I cracked, like literally laughed out loud, and I feel like I should have asked you that as a rapid fire question to
Aw,
put it back
thank
on you
you.
because uh again, keep bringing that humor, especially when you have such serious topics. But even if you don't, like, um, I get you. Like, that was great stuff in this book, and I so appreciated all of it. Um, I just want to really thank you so much for being here tonight. Like, you are such an excellent guest, and I
Aw.
just loved every minute of it. I know everybody here was so excited to have you on. There's just been so much chitter chatter and love coming. You have a lot of fans behind you, so know that you're going to have a lot of support along the way. And please keep us posted. Don't just post on TikTok though. Like, if we follow her YouTube as well, and she does do some posts there, and you can find out more on her YouTube, obviously her TikTok account. In 1 week, next Monday, May 6th, we're going to be chatting with William Kent Kruger for The River We Remember. It's a 1958. A small Minnesota town is rocked by a shocking murder, pouring fresh fuel on old grievances in the dazzling novel, New York Times bestseller, work of art. So if you just can't get enough of murder, guys, this just, go right on into this one. Then in one more week after that, May 13th, we'll be chatting with Laurie Frankel for Family. So plan out those holds so you can have time to get those read. You're not going to want to miss it. Emily, just thank you. Like, I loved this talk. Thank you, readers out there, for joining. I've loved every minute of it. Subscribe to my YouTube. Like I said, I'd love to get that one more to 800.
I'm gonna go subscribe right after this, so you'll.
Oh, you're the best. Thank you. Keep me posted. I would love to, chat with you more coming up. I'm on Instagram, LB the Lover of Books, YouTube, Facebook, the Lover of LB's the Lover of Books. You're going to find reviews, recommendations, and of course, more author chats. Thank y'all. Anything else you want to say, Emily, before we shut it off for the night?
Yeah, well, just thanks so much for having me on. It was great chatting with you. I really appreciate you having me on.
We loved it. We loved it. Bye, everybody, and I'll see y'all in 1 week. Have a good night. Good night, Canada.